Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Rocket Lab Weekly. This one is a very exciting one. We are going to recap the earnings. We are going to recap the news of the week. And we're going to talk a little bit about the interviews that we have done with Peter Beck, and Dave G has done an interview with Peter Beck and Adam Spice. So this is definitely going to be an amazing episode. So how have your guys' week been?
Pretty busy myself. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, in the process of turning over an Airbnb at the moment. So so far so good. Closed on it yesterday, and I've been mostly doing nothing and letting sister and brother-in-law do most of the work, but I have chipped in here and there.
Cool. So are you guys like renovating the Airbnb and furnishing it, or
no? Mostly furnishing. I mean, we're doing some minor stuff, but yeah.
Cool. Exciting to see. So please post whatever you can post without the trolls sharing the address.
We'll see.
Like
Yeah, hopefully the trolls don't get me this time.
Cool. So I think we can start with the earnings. It was a very interesting earnings call. I took out some highlights, and if you guys want to jump in with different viewpoints or different things that I might have missed, you are welcome. So obviously the first thing that came out was that launches, but they are still on track for having a record launch year. And as an analyst on the call correctly pointed out, that could be 12 launches. It would be a record year. And they never really answered on how much launches they're going for. They just said that the 22 launches is increasingly unlikely as the time goes and if their cadence doesn't go up. I just want to add one point here, that on the interview with Peter Beck, he actually completely handled me on this, and he gave me a total different viewpoint, and that is that partially what the customers are paying for is Rocket Lab's flexibility with the launches, and the customers pay for different milestones. So as long as so before the launch, the Rocket Lab collects 90% of the launch revenue. It's just when they do the actual physical launch, that's when in the accounting they can recognize all that revenue. And it completely changed my mind about the launches, because I feel like the to track the launches is not even so indicative of how the company is doing. It's more like how the customers are doing, because they can have delays. And I think a much better metric to track would be how many new launches are they selling, and if they would have a breakdown of like how are they doing with the manufacturing of the electrons. So this on Wall Street seemed to be a big issue, that it seems like they're not going to launch as much. But after the interview, I feel like this is a complete non-issue. But I'm very curious. We can start with you, Scott, like what you thought about this and what your viewpoint is on this.
I mean, as far as the recognition and whatnot, yeah, that's pretty insightful. I think this is similar to what Relativity does as far as their, I want to say revenue recognition, but they haven't quite got to that stage yet. As far as the actual cadence, I was expecting an upstep to the 22, because if you remember, there was that New Zealand Herald article that mentioned we're going to have 20 launches, and then it mentioned 3 to 4 total. I'm paraphrasing, but 3 to 4 haste launches throughout the year. I believe it's 3 or 4. Anyways, I was expecting at 1 or 2 more haste contracts to be announced this earnings, and we didn't get that. And I thought that was a little unusual, because it was like the launch director that mentioned additional haste launches throughout the year, and that never came to fruition. So I'm unclear if the number of haste launches, if some of those maybe got brought into 2024, like for maybe Leidos got bumped ahead. But I was a little bit surprised either way to not have any contract announcements for the Q1 call.
All right, Matt?
Yeah, just following up on that, I believe that a lot of the, I don't know for certain, but I believe a lot of the Department of Defense specific haste contracts actually start in 2025. I know they did mention in the manifest that there would be some within 2024, but I'm not sure when those would be scheduled. So yeah, just to add some color on that, because I think there was some announcements, I think in 3Q, 4Q last year about those DoD haste missions, but I think that a lot of those were slated for 2025. But overall, I mean, it's to be expected, and I think um, Peter gave some really good color as to a lot of what they fight with. I mean, you could literally just see in this picture to the right how many vessels they have already kind of preset to be able to launch, and he gave a lot of color with respect to, hey, we're ready whenever they are, right? And I think that this is nice because it gives them capacity to grow with the industry as it kind of matures. And I think a lot of people are assuming that because they see SpaceX launching so frequently, that you have so much demand. But in reality, a lot of the demand is stemming from SpaceX launching their own Starlink light, not liners, but vessels. And so with that, that's the majority of the reason why they're launching the Falcon 9 so frequently. And I think it skews people's views. And not to say that SpaceX is doing poorly, but I think it skews people's views. If you think about it, it's really between SpaceX and Rocket Lab that it's getting the majority of the business. Yes, ULA has their opportunities as well, but the majority of other folks have really barely launched in 2023 and 2024, with the exception of one or two vessels from ULA and a test vehicle from Relativity earlier this year. And I think a few others are starting to get going as well. But if you think about it in that perspective, the fact that we're still on track for likely 15 to 20 plus launches is pretty phenomenal. And but I'm sure I was going to say and venture into the Neutron piece, but I'm sure we'll venture into that.
Yeah. We're going to. And I just want to answer one comment. People are asking where Dave is. So Dave is going to phone into this phone call at around 45. And then he's going to stay for like 10-15 minutes. So just for people who are wondering. But yeah, we go to the next point, and okay, it's not Neutron yet, but soon. So Peter, back in the interviews, I didn't pay so much attention to this when they announced this on the earnings, but they got a $32 million end-to-end mission for Space Force contract. And Peter, back in the interviews, specifically both in ours and in Dave's interview, said that this was a lot more significant than people have thought, because this is the future of space, where they are like basically delivering everything, and the government, it seems like, came to them for only a functionality, which I guess was like, we want to track something in the atmosphere, or I'm probably getting it completely wrong. And then Rocket Lab just got all the free hands to deliver it how they can. So I want to start with you, Matt, this time. What did you think about this? Do you think this is very significant? And what your thoughts are on this?
I think it's just a continuing deepening of a great partnership between the Space Force and Rocket Lab. Personally, nothing really too much to add. It's just a continued contract. I mean, if you want to dive deeper into what do you mean, there's that 18 satellite crap. I'm forgetting the exact terminology for it, but the Space Development Agency, right? That's Space Force as well. Yeah, so that, if you think about it in that light, there's literally hundreds of millions of dollars that is coming out of the Space Force right now. And so far, so good.
Cool. Scott?
I don't have much to add to that. It's well said.
All right. Then we go on to the next one. Okay, so this is a very interesting one. So they got a $150 million solar supply agreement with a space prime, who we can only speculate on who it is. My guess is it's either Northrop Grumman or Lockheed Martin. And the reason why I'm guessing that is I was reading their 10Q filing with the SEC, and they had a part that said like customers that were more than 10% of the order. So like they were doing a risk disclosure of who are the customers that are too big for Rocket Lab and are responsible for more than 10% of their order backlog or of their revenue. And Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman were both listed on this, but it didn't say what their orders were. What's really interesting about this is that their backlog was decreasing. So they got $150 million contract, and logically then the backlog should go up 150 million, but in actual fact, their backlog decreased 3.something%. And this was also something that I wanted to ask Peter back on the interview, but they basically told me that they cannot give me more answer than what they have said due to customer confidentiality agreements. And I did a little bit of digging, and this is what I think is happening. And I'm very curious what Scott thinks about this, because he's the one who started this, pointing it out that certain contracts are missing from the revenue. So if you read their 10Q, this is the latest one that they submitted with the earnings. So they specifically define what they count as backlog. And it says that the amount of backlog increases with new contracts and additions to existing contracts, and decreases as revenue is recognized on existing contracts. The contracts are included in the amount of backlog when an enforceable agreement has been reached. So my guess is that what's going on with these orders is they make a contract that they can use as a base for new contracts. So let's say Lockheed Martin goes to Rocket Lab and says, like, look, we have government entities, we have commercial customers that are going to order satellites from us, and we think that in 3 years it's going to be 150 million. Let's negotiate solar panels for this amount of orders. And then they get a price. And then Lockheed Martin goes, okay, we got Amazon. I'm just giving an example. Amazon, they ordered for 10 million. So we put in a 10 million order for you, Rocket Lab. And that part is enforceable. And then it goes on to the backlog. This is what I think is happening. It's not a big conspiracy theory. It's quite, I think, good, because you can really rely on when Rocket Lab says that we have a backlog. It's not like, some of the rocket launchers, like Relativity, they have an I don't know how many billions of backlog, and you wonder, like, where does all this money come from? So very curious, Scott, what are your thoughts about this? And yeah.
I'm curious to see how much of this 150 million actually comes to fruition. I kind of did some calculating on the backside of earnings, kind of subtracting what we do know, taking away the solar stuff, and it seems like this, like, to put it plainly, it seems like the backlog, once you, like, if you, yeah, I'm explaining this poorly, but if you take the backlog that we knew from December 31st, subtract what was recognized in Q1, and then kind of do some mental gymnastics for the bookings in Q1, it seems like there's $30 million of this that we know here, leaving another $30 million for a sorted backlog, I suppose. And we know that there wasn't any craft ordered, right? Or we can assume there wasn't any crafts ordered. So it does give us a glimpse into the merchant components. So I thought that was a bit of an interesting takeaway, kind of having known this $30 million, we can ultimately arrive at what the current rate for new adoption is outside of that.
So just so I understand, so what you're saying is that the backlog, there was like 60 million recognized in revenue, and then we know that they got $30 million of new contracts, and the additional 30 million you think is activation of these like solar panel agreement or the reaction wheel agreement. That's, if I understood it correctly.
Kind of what you're on the right. Yeah, right trajectory. The number's a little off. The backlog was like north of 1 billion. Then we had 92 subtracted. That's the Q1 revenue.
Yeah. And
then we can basically take the backlog as of the end of Q1 and then look at the net change between then and then subtracting the solar. That leaves us with an outstanding net change of $30.8 million for whoever else for the backlog. So this contract is nice, the $30 million, but outside of that, there's an additional $30 million that was added to the backlog outside of it. Hopefully that's a little clearer.
Yeah. Okay. So most probably that's the solar or the reaction wheel or both, or maybe some other phantom contract that we don't know about.
I don't necessarily think that's true, right? I think Lockheed probably said, "Hey, we're looking to use Rocket Lab or Solero as our prime sort of contractor for these solar panels going forward. We have some contract that we can give to you guys today. That's 30 million, so that's recognized as backlog for Q1. The remaining 120 million that Lockheed or whomever came and said, these are things that we're still working out on our end. Once we finalize that deal, right? Because when you go to these, you kind of say, okay, we're proposing, let's just say, Solero solar panels as the people that we're going to use. You have to bid that and then get an example as to, is that, say, competitive against whomever is pleading against. So we're probably going to be used as a subcontractor, be able to provide the Solero satellites, because we're not going to be providing the satellites ourselves, probably. Right.
Yeah.
So in that respect, it's contingent upon them getting their deal signed, and then obviously us getting the deal signed by whomever is using us as a subcontractor. That's where I think the 120 million remaining kind of comes in. That's the backlog piece. The second piece is, and Adam gave a lot of color to this in the questions and Q&A part of the One Crew earnings call. These previous contracts that they're still running through the previous backlog for Solero are still somewhat sub 30% gross margin, but a lot of these future ones are generally, he said, above 30%. So these new contracts that are kind of coming through are good, knowing that eventually they're going to run through the existing Solero contracts that they kind of have in place and eventually come up with higher margin, which in the end is going to mean higher EBITDA. And I think the Solero piece is very pertinent for people to recognize as well, because there's not many satellite solar makers out there. I think Solero was one of three, which I think was one of the more brilliant acquisitions that Rocket Lab had actually put in place. And after doing a little bit of research, initially when they SPAC'd and they got the 900 million from the private equity deal, the PIPE, I was like, why are they spending all this money so far on all these different sort of acquisition deals? It doesn't make sense to me. I was like, this is a rocket company. And then I truly started to understand the brilliance that is Peter Beck and the brilliance that is Adam, to recognize that they didn't care about the launch business on its own, right? They cared about the end-to-end piece. And this was the Solero piece, was the beautiful nut that would be part of that end-to-end strategy.
Yeah, I agree with you, Matt. Cool. So now we go on to the next slide on the earnings, and that is Neutron. We finally arrived at Neutron. So again, this was very interesting because they said something on the earnings call, and then in the interviews they got a little bit, or at least I got a little bit more color on that. They understand how much the investors are putting attention on Neutron, and then they're somehow, I feel like in investors, like in Wall Street, it became like Rocket Lab equals Neutron equals Archimedes engine. And then whenever there was a fear of, okay, the engine is being delayed, the stock price was going down. And they knew this in Rocket Lab, right? And then Peter said, yeah, we could have just taken a chamber, out to the test bed and, poured some gas on it and set it on fire. And you would have seen fire from an engine, but that's not a long-term solution for the company. So the delays were because they were trying to make sure that, one, it's going to work on the first test, and number two, that all the parts that they're doing is very easy to put into production. So curious about your guys' take on the engine and Neutron in general. Matt, we can maybe start with you.
Sorry, what specific is the question?
I mean, what you thought about the engine being done, like how, we know that Neutron was delayed from December to in the middle of 2025, which, by the way, I think was more than priced into the stock, and people were. It was not a big surprise that it was delayed.
Yeah. So with respect to Archimedes, you can see a few pictures there, plus the one that they posted on Twitter / Instagram. Beautiful looking engine. I'm really curious to see, and it seems like Vince, you convinced Peter that they should be doing a little bit more posting of, say, the actual tests themselves. So I'm curious to see what that looks like. One thing I'm also curious about, and then I'll get into the Neutron piece. I'm curious to see, how this thing operates under full capacity load versus the expected 10 to 20% that we're going to be using for Neutron liftoff. But that's a different story for a different day. And if we ever get Peter back on the horn, one of the questions I'll be asking him, so hopefully for Q2 we can set that up as one of the questions. Going on to Neutron, like you stated, I think a lot of people have been kind of stating, they think it's going to get pushed out 3 months to 6 months. People speculating on the March dates that some of these folks that need medium launch vehicles started to show up. Same with June. So I think a lot of people started to speculate that the date was trying to slip. I was optimistic, pretty much. So I guess woe is me there. But at the end of the day, it is rocket science, right? And generally speaking, with these big engineering sort of work, any setbacks have a trickle down effect. And I think maybe what ended up happening was maybe they weren't aware of how much actual testing you needed to do from the FAA perspective. It seems like the rocket test, specifically for Archimedes, in previous, it just seemed like, yeah, we'll hot fire test it and then we'll be ready to go at 6 months later, and we'll kind of put that up in the air. To me, it seems like now they're giving a little bit more detail and granularity of what specifically needs to happen for the Archimedes test, which is 50 different sort of tests throughout, right? And obviously there's probably sub pieces within there. To me, being, I guess, a rookie in this business and really not having the knowledge of rocket, I am an engineer by education, but at the same time, I've never put a rocket in space. So having that kind of granular detail saying that there's 50 different tests, I think is very prudent for them to kind of explain. To me, I assumed it was like test the engine 3-4 times, and then you get to put that bad boy on a rocket and send it up into space. So my rudimentary knowledge really, I guess ignorance is bliss sometimes. So in that respect, I was still hopeful for the December, but here we are, June, and I think that that's still not a big deal. I'm excited to see it go up and hopefully see it come back down. But I'll give it 2 times. I think the first time might be a little rough of a landing, as it always is. And I'm also curious, the procedure that they're going to do with that, because it took a little bit of finessing for the Falcon 9, and I think it took a couple tries of that as well. So that'll be just as fun. And not only do you get to see the going up part, but the landing part, which is always, it still boggles my mind. It looks like CGI. But sorry for taking so much time, Scott. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
No, all good. You probably have a lot more to say on it than I do. My concern or curiosity, I guess, is when, maybe 6 months ago, if you were to say Neutron might not be coming this year, I feel like you get pounced on by retail and they'd be like, there's no way, like, how dare you say that? And now I'll be the first one to say it. I'm already like, well, okay. So I was thinking before the call, we're going to be pushed out a little bit, maybe first half of 2025. And now I'm like, mid 2025, let's be honest, that's second half of the year. But I am wondering, like, is that realistically more like 2026, but they're kind of not trying to like give false hope, but not devastate investors. And kind of to add to what you're saying, Matt, as far as the recovery efforts go, I'd imagine that the first 1, maybe 2, they're probably just going to drop in the ocean. I don't imagine them trying to be recovered in pretty much any regard. And so at that rate, it's like, where does the recovery for Neutron take us out to at that point? Is that like a 2028 or like end of decade kind of task? And yeah, I don't know. I've not.
What do you mean recovery for Neutron? You don't think they're going to be able to land it, until 2028?
I don't know if they're going to try to land it until 2028. Because I mean, if we do, like, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think Peter said in interviews that they are going to try to land it, and my best guess is that they're going to maybe soft land in the ocean to not blow up any space pads that they have in Virginia, and then they can assess the health of the rocket that they fished out from the ocean. But I don't think, I agree with you that I don't think they will reuse. They will try to reuse the first ones.
You think they will try to reuse right away, like first?
No,
first
I'm not. I don't think that the first ones. They just take the data. We have a guest who popped in here. Hello, Dave. How are you doing?
Hot Dave.
Not bad. I'm just audio's a little quiet on my phone, so it's a little harder to hear you guys. But
You sound good.
yeah, I wasn't at home
our
today.
audio.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
you
little harder
sound
to hear
good.
you guys. But yeah, I don't have my usual setup or anything.
No problem.
How's the
I
call
know-
been going?
Yeah, it's been good so far. We've been going over the Q1 earnings, and I know we have you for a limited time. So I want to ask you, like, what did you think about the earnings? What are your key takeaways?
To be honest, yeah, I've been pretty busy lately, not just with the videos and stuff, but with the day job too, and wedding planning stuff. So I haven't gone over the numbers yet in depth. Just my initial perception was pretty positive. Seems like the margins are moving in the right direction to me. The launches obviously not being the 22 is a little bit of a downer, but overall I was pretty okay with how things went. Like, it was a lot of stuff we all pretty much already expected, like the Neutron delay, maybe not hitting 22 launches. I think we all kind of already expected it. So yeah, I wasn't too disappointed with anything. How did you guys feel about it?
Yeah, the same. I really like that Peter Beck gave color on the launches, that they actually, like, the customers pay for their flexibility, and they actually collect 90% of the income of the launch before it gets launched. So for me, it became like, okay, we're actually not hitting the 22 because they are being delayed with the rockets. Like, we're not hitting it because the customers are being delayed, but the money is still coming in. And I actually think I'm not going to track the launches so close. It's more like, how much launches are they selling, and maybe if they can give more color on, where the different like how they are doing with the booster production, or maybe the money collection for the missions is a better metric.
Yeah. It was, I mean, I go back and forth. Obviously, like, how much revenue you're realizing does still matter to the numbers. But, knowing that it's there in the bank and, like, the customer can't claw it back or anything if they don't want to launch at some point is nice. But it was interesting to hear they basically are, like, building each booster for a customer. I just thought they just kept rolling off the line, and then, the next customer, whoever it is, would take that booster. But it seems like it's very planned out, like how many they build it for the launches they have under contract. So that was interesting.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and then also this week you had an interview with none other than Peter Beck and Adam Spice. So congratulations for that interview. Yeah.
I mean, I guess we both did. So it's an amazing week. Didn't really ever expect it to happen, to be honest with you. And it's definitely a little nervous to start the interview, but then I think I kind of settled in and got over it. And I think it went pretty well. I think they both went pretty well, to be honest. So, yeah.
Yeah. So what were your key takeaways from the interview? Did it make you more or less bullish on Rocket Lab?
Oh, more bullish for sure, which I guess shouldn't be unexpected. But yeah, I just like, first of all, Peter Beck, I just think he is such a great CEO, and that was kind of reiterated, and he really knows everything about the industry, and I think that's so important when you're investing in a smaller company, especially, or like one in the space industry. So I felt really good about that. It was really clear how he has absolutely no worries at all about Neutron demand. And we're all sitting there before the call waiting, like, when's the first contract coming? Is Starship going to take all their customers? Is Falcon 9 going to reduce their prices? And we're all like stressing and worrying about demand. And he's over there like not worried at all. So I assume he's having lots of conversations about that and feeling very confident. So like that was nice to hear as well.
Yeah,
How did you guys think about the Neutron stuff on the call?
Yeah, Matt or Scott, you can answer this if you.
We were actually just kind of discussing, like kind of as you mentioned the other day, Dave. I'm kind of like a bearish bull on Rocket Lab. So what I was kind of proposing to the group is like, if they're saying, mid 2025, I'm more realistically expecting that to be second half 2025, maybe 2026. And I'd imagine that the first 1 or 2 neutrons is just going to be dropped in the ocean. What are your thoughts, Dave, on
sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead, yeah.
He did say they're going to attempt to recover the first one. Not that they will be successful at, but they'll try.
Okay, I maybe misunderstood or something. Do you know how recent he mentioned that?
I think he mentioned it.
That was probably several months back.
Yeah, multiple times, yeah.
Okay, my bad. I'd love to be proven wrong. I hope from the get-go they're trying to recover.
He really wasn't trying to make promises, though, if it was going to be successful. He made it very clear we're going to try.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like, we'll take a shot at it, basically, is what he said. So.
And what do you think that looks like? Would that be on land, like have some kind of makeshift landing pad, or like they wouldn't do a barge, obviously, right? It'd sink.
Must be back to land. Yeah, I don't think it would be the barge. Okay. So. And that would also help giving you an idea what kind of payload they could handle for that first launch, because obviously it would be more like 8 tons and not 13 tons if they're having a return to launch site landing or attempt anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good thought because, you would need kind of a landing pad, right? And not like a launch pad. And a lot of that near wallops is kind of, I don't want to say dense because they do have some space between them, but yeah, I think you'd want to put some sort of landing pad kind of far away from that main wallops kind of launch area just because there's so much critical infrastructure there. I'm actually kind of curious now that you're kind of talking through the logistics, how that would work out.
Don't you guys think that they would try an ocean one first? Because if they mess up the landing and they blow up the pad, like that would create a significant delay on Electron, Neutron, all their launches.
Sorry, guys, I was trying to fix my audio, but I'm going to give up on that.
No problem. We can hear you, Dave. So do you think that it doesn't it make more sense if they would try to soft land in the ocean like the first time and not on the pad? Because if they blow up the pad, then it will like mess up their cadence from wallops.
Well, if you look at the images they released when they kind of announced the wallops infrastructure, there's 2 separate pads, one for launching, one for landing. Like the landing one is not that far away and you can kind of see it kind of down the beach. But, if they can actually aim the thing, even if they explode on that landing pad, hopefully it won't damage the launch pad enough to hurt cadence. The test land in the ocean, probably the safer option, but again, you're just kind of giving up on ever reusing that booster at that point. So I guess that's the trade-off you'd make.
Yeah. I mean, I
Sounds
guess
like
you
a question for next quarter's call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because I guess if you fish out the booster from the ocean, like you can still assess, what was the flight damage, what was the water damage, and then you can see if you need to optimize. But you're correct. Like that one is never flying again. So sounds like a question for the next call. Cool. So Dave, how much time do you have more with us?
Well, probably like another 5-10 minutes, and then I gotta head out.
Okay, good. Then we can just continue with where we were. We were going through the investor deck, and on Neutron, another thing that I wanted to show is that when you read through the deck and you look at the pictures, it looks like a lot of the pieces of Neutron is coming together. Like this, like they're showing here on red of the, you know, the first stage, second stage, and the second stage tank, the first stage tank. I think that this big piece is this piece here on Neutron, and they are talking about like doing an assembly on these. And, you know, there's like other pictures of, you know, different parts of Neutron. And then 2 days after the earnings, let me see if I can share this. They also tweeted out the Neutron assembly facility taking place. So I think that Neutron development is going along very, very nice, actually. And I want to disagree with the bull bear here, that I think that they are doing seemingly quite well with the timeline.
Yeah, time will tell.
Yeah. And by the way, I also wanted to mention, I recently got on YouTube a recommendation to watch Rocket Lab's Neutron announcement. No, sorry, it was Electron's announcement. And they were selling launches for $4.1 million when they made the announcement for Electron. So, and if you look at it, like today, we're selling them for 8.1 million. And the company is still not profitable. So I kind of understand what he means when he says, I'm not worried about demand, and we don't want to do the same mistake that we did for Electron, because that would mean that they would sell for like 25 million a launch just so that it can please the short-term investors, and it would send the stock up temporarily, but it's not for the long term of the company. What are you guys' thoughts on this?
Well, going back to the minimum sales price for Electron, yeah, I think 4 million initially. I think when they went SPAC, they were saying 6.5. It's kind of what they were selling them for. The ones that we're seeing now are around 8, but they basically stated, and I don't know if it was the fourth quarter earnings call or this one, but 8.5 is kind of the minimum for a normal Electron, and then Haste ones are actually selling for 10 million plus. So we're in a good good area code, and I think demand still for the small vehicle will do extremely well, and I think we'll start off at 55 million for Neutron, and as I think you'll continue to see the industry consolidate, I wouldn't expect to see that go below 75 in about 5 years' time.
That's actually a very interesting thing, because you know, on Electron they don't really have a competition, but on Neutron they actually do. And very curious if it's going to be the Falcon 9 and Starship and Neutron all together, and everybody can increase prices, or both of them have to come down on prices a little bit.
Here's a question for you guys, because it's one I was thinking about recently. Like, obviously, it's taken Electron quite a while to get positive, and they need like a quite high cadence to do it, probably like 16 plus. How many launches do you think it takes for Neutron to be like a positive cash flow, like accretive to the bottom line?
That's a very good question.
I think was that on your call, Dave, or was it in the 1Q earnings call where they said that they see a similar trajectory of like a couple years to kind of get towards where it gets to the place where it's pretty much positive, and they think that basically it might escalate the learning curve, or I guess the profitability curve, slightly due to the fact that they're building in reusability from day one rather than kind of what they're doing now with Electron. But I think that they stated that the curve would probably be pretty comparable, if I remember. But I'd love for somebody, because I feel like I'm butchering that really bad by stating that.
You're right about the curve of the how many launches. They start with 1 and then like 3 and then 5, kind of similar to Electron. My hope is just maybe Neutron is profitable at say 7 launches, as opposed to Electron being profitable at 16. I don't think they quite guided for that, although they did kind of say they expect the curve to be steeper for Neutron. So that was my hope. Just curious what your thoughts were.
I think that if you think about it though, like Electron on its own is profitable. It probably has been for quite some time. I think that's the way that we might not be thinking about it appropriately though, is the drag on just overall overhead from SG&A perspective, like, you know, just normal selling, general administrative costs, that now that we're kind of even or getting closer towards even with that, Neutron, while it might take a little bit to get to a place of being profitable or break even, probably won't be as noticeable because you already have that baseline from Space Systems and baseline from Electron really paying off that SG&A kind of overhead drag that we currently have.
I was actually also going to say that they need to amortize the development cost on the launches, and I have no clue, like in their accounting, how they do it, because we know that it's been let's say the development is 300 million, right? And I don't know if that R&D cost, maybe Scott, you're very good on these numbers. Like, do they amortize that per launch, or is it that they get like a schedule that over 10 years they're going to amortize that? Because if it's per launch, then let's say that they do it on 10 launches, then it's $30 million per launch in the bookkeeping that is going to be minus, but it's like a bookkeeping minus because they're amortizing like past costs.
The quick answer is I'm not too sure, but I mean, ultimately, I guess that would be offset by when being earnings negative for so long, and then a company flips and becomes earnings positive, kind of like what we saw with Tesla. For the longest time, they're paying like 10% of a tax provision, but recently that's gone up to like 20 plus, like kind of on par with the rest of the S&P 500. That's probably what we'll see from Rocket Lab. So indirectly, I guess the answer is sort of, but I don't think it will show up in the way that you're suggesting, as far as like it won't show up in like the launch margin in that manner. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's my understanding anyways.
But they will need to pay for, you know, the launch infrastructure.
Yeah.
And also something that they have said on Neutron a lot is that it takes a similar amount of personnel that Electron takes, and it will be much easier to become profitable on Neutron. And I was just doing a little math on it, that if they have 30% gross margin on Neutron, 55 million launch times 30%, that's $16.5 million of gross margin per launch. And if they keep up the current quarter, it was 90 something million. Their gross profit was, I haven't looked at the numbers, but I'm guessing it's 28 million, something like this. So 2 Neutron launches would create more gross profit than what they have done this quarter, and without really increasing their personnel. I mean, I guess we have to see, but it should be a lot easier than Neutron. Cool. I think Dave had to go. I think his internet was choppy, but it was time to go for him. Let's see if he comes back to say goodbye. But we continue with the earnings report, and I mean, we kind of started because the next one would be the financials. Dave, you're back.
I think I dropped off there.
Was it your internet?
I think it probably was, yeah. I'm not at home, so it's not as good.
No problem. No problem. We
But
appreciate you.
I do think I should head back. So it was nice checking in with you guys. Sorry I can't stay for the full episode, but I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming, and good luck with all the wedding planning.
Thanks. Okay, see you guys next.
Yeah. Ciao, ciao. Cool. So back to this one. So the finances of the company, we can see that the backlog decreased 2.9%. We went into that a little bit already. Then their operating expenses, let me see if there was anything here. Yeah, this is the GAAP, non-GAAP. If you guys want to comment anything on the numbers, feel free.
The thing that I was most excited about was really seeing that 564 million in cash, knowing that the company has the strong financial, cash position to actually take on acquisitions. Unfortunately, the rest of the industry is really consolidation, layoff mode, really focusing on their burn rate. Velo 3D comes to mind, Astra comes to mind, Virgin Galactic comes to mind. So all these people are unfortunately in ramp down mode, but yet here we see Rocket Lab 60% year over year growth in terms of revenue. I think that is something that really should be recognized by the industry, because unfortunately a lot of people, and Peter said this in our interview, Vince, he said unfortunately a lot of people, even the really high quality folks, will unfortunately drop out during this space winter that we're kind of undergoing. And those, I don't want to say those are exact words, but pretty much came right from his mouth. And that's something I've recognized, and to kind of see that Rocket Lab is actually able to go out to market and get that $300 million convertible at a pretty favorable rate and have 500 some million dollars in the backlog, or not on the backlog, on the balance sheet, really helps out. And it makes it seem like they have 200 to 300 million to kind of play with a little bit of extra runway to get them to Neutron launch and really get themselves to a place where they're growing cash on the balance sheet month by month and quarter by quarter. But that's getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, there was one other thing that got me very excited. Did you guys see this? That here they're breaking out the non-GAAP free cash flow. So that's like not including the stock-based compensation. And they had an operational minus of $2.6 million. And then they had a minus of 19.2 million, which was cash consumed from property, equipment, and software. Which I guess has to do with Neutron, but the operations part was minus 2.6 million. I mean, that's almost cash break even.
Yeah, I think that's part of the working capital piece that I want to learn a little bit more of. A lot of this has to do with the MDA contracts that are starting to actually flow through. But yeah, I agree. I think things are starting to look better from an OpEx and cash flow perspective.
Scott, any
Matt,
comments?
I guess I'll ask both of you. What is your take on the R&D/CapEx spend going forward? Because the previous plan was like get the Neutron launching at the end of the year, and then everything's going to kind of taper down, and then by the end of 2025 we can start talking profitability. Do you think that's been pushed out till like next year now, or do you think they'll still be able to wind down that R&D and CapEx spend in the same time frame?
The only thing I will say to this is he said on our interview, and I realized that again we're thinking wrong a little bit. That he said it's almost like we raise the money to pour concrete and buy buildings, and everybody is focusing on the rocket, right? And just as with Tesla, you have to build out a factory to be able to produce cars, and everybody is somehow focusing on like when is the car coming out. It's very similar with Neutron, that they needed to build a new pad, a new supporting infrastructure, engine factories. And even if the launch is delayed, I think, but again, this is what I think, we have to see from next earnings. I don't think that the cost would go up so much after that, because the big cost is the launch pad, the buildings, the machines to make Neutron. Yeah, that's my thought. I don't know what Matt thinks.
I don't know. To answer your question, my initial thought is things are just going to take longer, and it didn't seem like at the moment that there's really any additional expenses or anything of the like. It seemed like really that it was just going to take 2 quarters longer. So to me, I think that might actually help out from a quarterly R&D budget perspective, but I could be completely wrong. It didn't, from what I understood, there was some minor updates that they wanted to build into the process prior to launching Neutron. So make the engine more maybe efficient to be able to build, maybe some of the different materials that they worked on from the tank really starting to flow through the process, and kind of resetting the process line or the assembly line to incorporate those things now versus later. I don't necessarily think that those are going to add, let's just say, dozens of millions of dollars in additional capital, but maybe expand out the time frame. So my hope is that between now and when they launch, it's still another 75 to 100 million dollars to get to that point. But I don't think it's going to grow to 150, 200 million from here or something like that.
Cool.
It would be nice to ask Adam Spice, like, how much have you spent on Neutron? Like, what is left of the Neutron spend?
I think they talked about that a good bit at the TD Cohen, if I remember correctly. When was that? That was February-ish, right after 4Q earnings call, and I think that they stated that they spent, I want to say it was close to 200 million to date, 100 million of which was Rocket Lab's capital, 125 million was from milestones from other people, basically subsidizing the build, right? Because obviously NASA and many others would like to see it get built. And I think that he stated that there's about 100 million left. So 300, if you think about it, pretty amazing to get a product that costs 300, let's just say they go over budget, 350, 400 million to get to pad, and they're going to be able to charge 55 million per launch for it at a minimum. I think that that's pretty impressive, because within 8 launches, at least you get, the sales price back. Obviously, it's not going to be the profit that you get back, but I think overall, from announcement in 2021, early 2022, to being able to launch in let's just say in 2025 at all, is very impressive.
Yeah. And by the way, also, Scott, I wanted to say that I was looking at old Rocket Lab videos of, like, what did they promise and what did they deliver? And for example, Electron was, I think it was late, but it was like a tiny little bit late compared to what they have set out to do. And it was also almost in record time that they developed Electron, and they have developed many things. Maybe I can send you that video. So they don't have a bad record on delivering on stuff. And I mean, of course, this is a rocket program, so like whatever can happen. I wouldn't be surprised if the launch is beginning 2026. I don't think it's the end of the world, but they have been, I mean, look, they said in 2020 or 2019 that they would start building the Neutron, and the flight date is 2024, and they only moved out the date like in 2024. Like it looked like they could have made it almost all the way to 2024, and visibly it's close. It's not like the SLS or the Starliner with Boeing, where they're like continuously failing the tests and there's this delay and that delay.
I think the only thing that they're truly behind on because of Rocket Lab, or maybe it's still I shouldn't say because of Rocket Lab. It might still just be customer demand. And I think they talk about this and give a lot of detail on this. Sorry, the beer. It's making me burp. They talk about this at quite length in the earnings call. Is the backlog for Solero, and the fact that they haven't run through it yet. And I think that disappoints a lot of people. And I think because of that, I think that they're a little bit disappointed that they're not through that, because it seems like it's a drag on the gross margins for the organization a bit. So other than that, and maybe the customers delaying the Electron launches, is probably the only thing that they probably pull back on. But if you look at what we were supposed to make in 2024 from the SPAC, which was back in 2020 timeframe, it's pretty much on target. And if you think about it, the speed at which it's growing is not too bad. So we might be 6 months or so, or maybe a year behind from what the SPAC target was. But that SPAC target was also extremely aggressive. As we know, most SPAC targets are aggressive in terms of revenue growth. So the fact that we're even potentially even in spitting distance of $600 million in next year, in terms of gross revenue coming through the organization, is pretty crazy. And then if you think about it, what they stated during the backlog piece of $1 billion, how they're going to run over 42% of that. I mean, you're talking about 420 million, which almost confirms that you should be getting about $1 million a quarter. Maybe not this year, but next year you should definitely have over $100 million a quarter. So it's nice. I mean, if you think about it in that perspective, last year we were only running sometimes $50-60 million a quarter. So now you're going to be running over 100. You're going to be doubling that, and then hopefully with additional launch cadence, let's just say next year, hopefully we do hit that 20-25 Electron launch cadence. Then eventually going to be building to 500-600 million. And then once you get Neutron, man, you get 1 or 2 Neutron launches a year. That alone is $100 million. So it's going to start accelerating pretty quick once Neutron gets off the ground.
I'm curious about your guys' opinion on something, because if they're going to blow through 41% of the backlog, right? And let's say we are on Q1 2025, right? And then do you think that the backlog is going to be 600 million at that time? And the only way to not have it like that is they need to announce some quite juicy contracts, because that's also going to be like a bad point if their backlog is not growing.
I don't think so, but I'll let Scott start.
I've got a lot of thoughts about backlog. That's kind of one thing where I specifically was hung up this past week, is that with the backlog and the recovery, that's where I spent most of my time. I haven't even got to listen to the call a second time through yet. But no, to answer your question, I think backlog is not going to be a problem. Because we have, like, I mean, the bulk of the backlog, or almost half of the backlog, that's like 2025 to 2027. So I mean, there's plenty of time frame for that to get kind of caught up again. I feel like there's something else I was going to add to that as well. I'm just kind of like, what when I'm looking at that 42% of backlog recognized throughout the next 12 months, to really simplify the math, that would mean revenue is stagnating at this 110 million per quarter mark.
Yeah.
Do you guys think there's going to be something down the road, like, especially with the commentary on the reaction wheels? Do you think that's like, where are we at with that? What's your take on that?
On the reaction wheels, I like, that's your area, and I'm curious about your opinion on that. But both on the earnings call and on the interview, they said that they are after new contracts that are as big as the SDA and maybe even bigger, and people should relax, because these contracts come very lumpy, like they don't come and I don't know if you're a Palantir investor. I know Matt is a Palantir investor. Like, we have seen with Palantir that the government contracts, they are lumpy and they come whenever they want to come, and sometimes you get a lot and sometimes you get nothing. And I am sort of expecting that any moment they can announce a $500 million or $1 billion contract that they got from someone. That's my opinion.
I mean, my thought process is the MDA was a very big contract, right? And that's just the satellites are just starting to get outlaid there. I believe that when people see the quality of that, even though Rocket Lab was a subcontractor for the MDA Global Star deal, which are, if you think about it, satellites for Apple, which is a pretty big deal. I think once that goes out and people see the quality of the satellites, and now that you have Rocket Lab now being a prime contractor for the U.S. government, and you have all these other folks that are really starting to build, I find it hard to believe that the revenue would stay at $110 million run rate. I mean, I think that's putting it very light. The space systems business on its own has continued to grow at a very fast pace. I'm sure there's a slide within here that breaks down specifically the space systems revenue. But if you think about it in that perspective, we've increased 60-something% year over year, and 2/3 of that was coming from the space systems business. So I find it very hard to believe that the revenue would kind of stay flat when they're talking about a potential $150 million deal, with whomever it is, and then you have all these other contract deals, and specifically the SDA. That's not something that is 18 satellites and done, right? Aside from the Neutron being up for the launch provider for those 18 satellites going to space, they've talked about how there's going to be a second tranche, a third tranche, a fourth tranche, a fifth tranche. We're talking thousands of satellites that have to go to space. So this contract was only for 18 of thousands of satellites that will eventually have to go to space, which is a lot of revenue that'll have to come through the door. And I anticipate that these are the start of these contracts. I assume that there's going to be multiple concurrently going on. And Rocket Lab will definitely be in contention to not just get the satellite piece of it, but also the launch piece of it in the future. And I think that once we see that, that's going to be when I think people really realize that Rocket Lab really has something in the bag that a lot of people are still very skeptical about. I'm not skeptical about it. I see, and after talking to Peter, briefly, I see his vision, I see his conviction, and he's delivered on that since 2006. So I don't think he'll stop now. And I think he's, if you think about it, comparatively to all the other space folks that are out there, he's pretty much the only one, maybe second to, is Elon. Everyone else is kind of chasing after Peter at this point. And I would love for somebody to kind of challenge me on that.
I can't challenge you on that. And I was thinking the same thing, that we are listening to the conference call and they are talking about like how they, landed the Varda spacecraft, how they're going to produce this rendezvous operation. And like they keep mentioning on the earnings call that it's a very special ability to have, and then all the competitors are just like on square zero trying to launch rockets. And there's so much behind, because when you launch the rocket, then, you need to scale it up, and then you need to learn all these things that Rocket Lab is already doing. So I think it's underappreciated how much they are ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And I guess we kind of talked about the guidance. So Matt, you're expecting that they're going to keep on growing. So then maybe if I translate what you're saying, and if they continue to, like, we had a 92 million quarter, next quarter is going to be, it looks like an easy 105, 110 million. If the quarter after that is also like 120 and then 125, we're going to be well over 400 million on yearly revenue. So you think that they're going to raise guidance and have a even better than forecasted revenue for the year? I'm curious what is your opinion on this?
You want the long answer or the short answer?
You can give the long answer at this point.
We have, I guess, 3 reference points for backlog. I'm going to hop over and make sure I'm on the right page. We have 3 reference points for backlog as far as the era, if you will, that they've said over the next 12 months, we're expected to recognize this much, right? So to kind of simplify that, first, I guess the first 2 periods we basically know for sure. And what was kind of guided for as far as what happens over the next 12 months came in at 8% higher, or will come in at 8% higher and 9.85% higher. So we'll call it a 10% beat compared to that whole 12-month or guidance for the next 12 months, the indirect full like next 12-month guidance. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
Past that, if we use that same kind of metric for the remainder of the year, it would look like, or not for the remainder of the year, for the next 4 quarters. We know pretty much that Q2 is going to be 107 million in the mid-range. But then for that same range to be recognized, the guidance over the next 12 months, we're looking at stagnated values for revenue. Give or take that 10% beat, if you want to assume that they're going to do that again. So that's what I'm a little unsure of in that regard. But to kind of be, play devil's advocate with myself, the space systems revenue for 2024 is going to be around $250 million. And chat, please correct me on this, because I'm trying to find, I haven't been able to find anything, but I'm assuming that 80% of the MDA contract is recognized this year. That's my understanding anyways. It's like 3/4, 80%, something in that range. Now, if you take the space systems revenue for 2024 and reduce that MDA recognition, you're only left with $135 million for everything else that is not MDA for space systems for 2024. The problem with that is on the call with Peter, he said 2,000 reaction wheels this year. Now, if you look at the website, those reaction wheels go for 100,000 to 120,000 each. So if you multiply 2,000 reaction wheels by 100, we'll go conservative, by the $100,000 each, that's, what is that, 200
million? Yeah.
200 million. But that is a far cry from the 135 that is everything else. And of course, it's not just MDA and then this one contract, right? So
you mean it's a far cry ahead?
Well, it's a far, like the rest of the space systems revenue should, in theory, be 160, we'll call it. We'll assume that there's like a 20% discount for the reaction wheels, but it's 135. So even if you were giving them like a reasonable discount, what would this discount be? Because it's like over 30%, but then that doesn't even factor in any other customer for 2024. Yeah. So I'm still, I'm glad
sandbagging.
I guess so. Like, I can't think what else it could be. They're either sandbagging or they're selling these for nothing. But then, like, to what Matt was saying is like, the Solero backlog is supposed to be worked through in Q1, or even if that got pushed back or pushed ahead by a couple quarters, the 30% space systems margins we're supposed to be seeing around this period. We more or less are already, but they're obviously not selling these reaction wheels for break even, right? So they're assuming to be selling at a premium of 30%, so they're making something on these reaction wheels. The numbers just don't add up. So I don't know if we're going to have like a huge like mic drop moment of, one day the market closes and it's like, oh yeah, by the way, guys, an extra $150 million recognized this year. I mean, I don't know. Something doesn't seem to be visible.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and it's very interesting to go into the numbers like this, because I see the same thing that you see, and yeah, he did say 2,000 reaction wheels. We can go into like this Elon type of communication, like maybe he meant that the rate at which they exit the year is a 2,000 per year run rate.
Well, no, because the same thing was mentioned on Dave's, and it wasn't run rate. Like I'm very particular with that because I've been watching Tesla for long enough. Yeah.
Or again, it's a contract that has not been like ordered in a way that is like, how do you call it? Like it's an order, but it's still
like an agreement, but not
like it's not sharp. Like it's still cancelable. Like it's not. Yeah, what do you think, Matt, about this?
I don't know. I don't have enough detailed insights about it. I just continue to see persistent growth, the space system side. I hope Scott's right. I don't really have any details on specifics. Yeah.
I'm sure that time will tell. Okay, I just one last thing in closing that is an interesting topic here. So this week, Rocket Lab announced that for this 515 million contract by the SDA, they have chosen their own suppliers, and they list the names here. The reason why I thought that this was very, very interesting is because they have collected the money on this latest transaction to get an inorganic acquisition of a company, and they said that it's a supplier that they work with, that they have a good relationship with, and that they like in the payload area, right? And I don't know so much about these companies, but it could be one of these companies that they are thinking about acquiring. So I just wanted to get your guys' take on this, if you know any of these companies, and if I'm completely off on this.
Matt, do you want to start?
I got distracted. Sorry.
Okay, I'll start because my leaning towards is Mynaric. I hope I pronounced that right. But
what do they do and how big are they?
yeah, see, that's already, I'm kind of like outside my depth. I believe it's like a type of communications or something like that. The reason that I think that it's Mynaric could be, well, yeah, again, I'll play devil's advocate with myself, is Mynaric makes sense because this is for the MDA satellites, right?
Yeah. No, it's for the SDA satellites.
Or sorry, SDA.
515 million, yeah.
And those are built on the Lightning bus. But if you look in the announcement of Mynaric's affiliation with this contract, it mentions that they are also built into the Pioneer bus. So I'm wondering if they're built just into Rocket Lab buses in general, or it seems like they're embedded within Rocket Lab as is. Now, they are a publicly traded company, and this is where I kind of like swing the other way, is I don't think that Rocket Lab would be interested in buying a company that has as not great of a financial situation as Mynaric has.
Yeah,
I think they're even at a negative. They're just not looking great overall.
Yeah, it's the same with Redwire. I don't think, because they said that on the private market, like they have said it many times, that what they're looking at is private market. So yeah.
Matt, I don't think it'd be Redwire. I think Redwire is too expensive. Because I mean, they're $300 million market cap now, and like you said, public, and you'd have to buy at a premium of that market cap. It'd just get that'd be all the cash, kind of in one shot.
Yeah. So Matt, just to reiterate, the question was that on the inorganic acquisition that they plan to do, they have said multiple times that it's a company that they have a working relationship with on the payload front. And this announcement is the companies that they're going to work with on the SDA contract. And it could be that one of these companies that they have announced is the one that they're looking at inorganically acquiring, but I have no clue. I don't know. Redwire is the only one that I know. And I was thinking, if you think this theory is correct, and if you know any of these companies, and if they can be candidates for this acquisition.
I don't really know, man. It's tough. The limit, obviously, to me, from an investor perspective, as a third party kind of investor looking at this, they have 560 million in cash. I'd hope that they wouldn't spend all of that, right? So you think, I think that something like 50 million is too small, although it's probably in the hopper of opportunities. And then something 100 million, I think, is too small for them as well. I would look for something that's in the 200 to 300 million dollar range, because I don't think that they would really make an acquisition of a super small size. So, that puts Redwire at the top end of that list. I don't know much about some of these others that would really give me a lot of confidence. I think that this was specifically just the subcontractors that they use for future satellites, if I remember correctly, right? It wasn't like a list of specifically people that they're looking at.
No, a subcontractor list. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to think of any other ones that I can kind of think of, and nobody's really coming to mind. There was one that people were talking about, which was like a New Zealand or Australian based sort of communications one. That's obviously been taken off the table. But yeah, it's been a couple months since I've really dug deep into it. But I'm curious to see, and it goes back to, while I don't have that answer, it goes back to what Beck said and has said it multiple times, is eventually he hopes 50% of Neutron's revenue kind of come through as their own, 50% of their launches come through for their own purposes, right? And the other 50% of the revenue or launches comes through because they're launching for somebody else. And so it goes back to, is this getting them closer, whatever inorganic opportunity that they have, getting them closer towards whatever they're planning on either building in-house or bolting on somebody else's work or IP that would get them slightly closer. So anyway.
Cool. Well, I think that this was it for this week. I think this was a very good episode, very good insights from all of you. Any last closing words about Q1 and where we go from here?
Nope, not for me.
I want to see some recoveries of the Electron. That's all.
Cool. Well, let's hope we get news on that.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'll see you next week, and may the force be with us. All right. Ciao,
Thank you.
everyone.